Calling exclusively on the Mining, Hamilton Road and Bridge North. Train standing at platform at number 1.
Every railway station should have a railway hotel. This is the Railway Bell Hotel across from Kidderminster Station. Car parked, we enter along the outdoor museum exhibits. First in view is an old semaphore signal array. If the top signal shows a white face and a black stripe, it is the back of a stop signal. On the left is shown the front side of the signal. This is the signal that a train driver would have to obey. The lower signal with a notch is the reverse of what is called a distance signal. It informs the driver of the state of the next stop signal on the route. All semaphore signals are operated by hand levers in a signal box. A system of chains, pulleys and steel cables connect the control levers to the axial signals. This red railway semaphore signal with a white stripe is a stop signal. In this position, it is indicating that the line ahead is not clear. A signal box lovingly rebuilt to preserve it for everyone. An old Scotland, England border marker. Most preserved railways have rolling stock in various stages of disrepair. They also have teams of enthusiasts who lovingly restore wagons and coaches. A railway travelling crane, used on railways to perform maintenance, handle freight and accident recovery. From the platforms you can look across to see the Railway Museum building. Today they don't offer Lions cakes, but they do have good coffees and so many types of cakes and snacks. Inside the museum you'll find all the smaller items of railway history, including this wall of station signs. They also have all the dire warning signs. Not sure what era they come from, but to me a 40 shilling penalty seems very large. Having come from the car park, we see the station concourse from the platform side. If your visit includes the plan to have a train trip, pop into the main hall to visit the ticket office. Signs from yesteryear abound. In the hall today, a display of model railways and stands selling books and memorabilia. 61306, a model of an LNER Thompson Class B1 steamer, Mayflower. It's a 460 steam locomotive built in 1948 at the North British Locomotive Company. 6233 Duchess of Sutherland in model form. She is a 462 Pacific Loco built in 1938. London North Eastern Railway Class A4 4468 Mallard, a 462 Pacific steam loco built in 1938. Its streamlined wind tunnel tested design allowed it to haul long-distance express passenger services at high speed. July 3, 1938, Mallard broke the world speed record for steam locomotives. The model track features models of some very old locos and carriage stock. The lead loco appears to be a model of a Robert Stephenson-built Planet steam engine. For the second in this double header, I am going with a Robert Stephenson Pattern T from 1833. A model of Associated Equipment Company Railcar number 19 in Great Western Railway colours. Out at the platform, Stanier Mogul 13268 arrives. A 1934 build, 260, it took from 1971 to 1990 to return it to steam. After a further heavy overhaul, she returned to traffic in April 2024. What a beautiful example of a locomotive. Badges on coach doors. Quite elaborate designs. 4930 Hagley Hall, a 460 built in 1920 at Swindon. She was taken out of mainline service in 1963 with 1,295,236 miles on the clock. Hagley Hall was brought back into passenger service with Preserved Railways in 1979. She then spent from 1986 till 2022 between static display and then undergoing a lengthy and costly overhaul. While Hagley Hall waits carriageless, a rake of carriages stands in a spur. 7714, an 060 Collet 5700 class GWR pannier tank. Only 16 of 863 built survive. All our railway history needs preserving. This includes the stinkpot diesels. Here we see Delta 1015, one of 7 preserved Western Champion diesels out of 74 built at Swindon and Crewe. A 1963 build, as recent as August 2024, this loco had mainline certification. Rumble guts rumbles. Connecting up, a lot of manual work. Great Western Railways Inspection Saloon, 80972, one of 7 built. It entered service in 1948. Presently, 80972 is used as an observation car, most often being attached to the end of a rake of carriages for private hire or cream tea specials. Coach 2886, a London, Midland and Scottish Railway 6-wheeled passenger brake, built in 1932. Serious restoration began in 2010, with the coach appearing on public display again in April 2019.